Three board members of the Journal of Zimbabwe that is here. I was trying to remember what year it was. It was a long time ago. Myself and Joanne McGregor ran a publication workshop here at UZ. And JSAS has actually just launched a program which Gerald is going to talk more about, a kind of mentoring program for academics in the region. So I'll leave that to him to explain in more detail. But what I wanted to do is just briefly kind of unpack a bit the process of publishing in a journal. I'm going to talk through how JSAS works, because it's a bit of an oddity, in fact, in the world of journals. It's like a strange cooperative of some kind. So I'll kind of underline what's different about it as a journal, and then maybe talk about how other journals come to work. So when you come to think about publishing, the first question you have to ask yourself is, where should you publish? Which is the appropriate journal for you? And how do you go about deciding that? Obviously, I mean, you've mentioned a number of journals already, but if you're writing more about politics, you might think of African affairs. If you're writing more about history, you might think of the Journal of African History. If you're writing more ethnographically, engaging with debates in anthropology, you might think of Africa. And then the journals like the Journal of Zimbabwe still have particular characters. And JSAS tends to be quite empirically oriented and a bit historically oriented. Though we've been trying to publish more widely, bringing in, for example, work on literature of late. So what you need to do is really read these journals and see what they're publishing. Read the last few issues. See what kind of work they're engaging with. And the other way to think about it is, who are you citing in your work? Where are the people you're citing and publishing? So you want to be publishing in the place you're having a conversation with. So that should follow kind of organically from your own work. Don't try and write something for a journal. Find the journal that suits your writing, because it's very hard to do it the other way around. It doesn't tend to work. It doesn't tend to be sort of convincing. Yeah, so you want to join the community that you're part of, and you want to go out there and find that community where you're publishing. So that's the kind of first step, is identifying the relevant journal for your own work. The second step is maybe a bit of an obvious one, but all journals have very specific requirements as regards style and length, and how you cite things, and all that kind of stuff. So if you send in a paper that's much too long, to JSAS, for example, it'll simply be sent back to you. So don't waste your time by making that kind of just submitting something that doesn't fit the criteria. And then you'll also see that in JSAS that it doesn't have, for example, work that is narrowly policy oriented, or that takes the form of a kind of consultancy report, something like that. If you submit that, that's also likely to be returned to you without having been read, because it's simply not the kind of thing that the journal publishes. Yeah, okay, so let me turn to the process. So if you submit a piece of work to JSAS, what happens to it? You send it into our coordinating editor, Colin Stone, and then it disappears, and you don't see it again for probably 3 or 4 months. At a minimum, it can be 6 months until you hear back again. So what happens in that interim? The first thing Colin does is he allocates the article to an editor who usually has some kind of expertise in the area of that particular piece. Then the piece is circulated to the board, the JSAS board members, who volunteer to read it based on their own expertise. That's already a very unusual practice. So JSAS's papers are all read by the board itself. That is, it's an internally run process, whereas most journals will send the paper out to external readers, and they will draw a much bigger pool than we draw on in terms of readers. We also don't, another unusual aspect of JSAS is that we don't anonymize the articles that we read. So your name will appear on the article that goes to the readers. Most journals do anonymize articles. And you can see that there's a different kind of logic to the two processes. The reason why we don't, and we've debated this at great length, I don't know if you were there, Joe, for our lengthy debates about whether or not to anonymize articles. But we decided not to in the end. And that's because we seek to actively promote the work of early career authors and scholars working in African universities. And to do that, we need to go to the authors. In aid of that, we keep the author's name on it. And JSAS is, the reason why we ended up justifying it again is because JSAS has been hugely successful in this regard. There was a comparison between JSAS and all of the other Africanist journals. We published a much higher percentage of African scholars and early career scholars than any other journal. And that's what, it's something that we consider part of our mission, and it's something that we're very proud about and want to sustain. So keeping the identities of authors visible is in aid of that. Okay, so the readers get sent to you. The readers volunteer to read your article, they receive your article, they write a report on your article. That goes back to the editor. Then another odd thing happens in terms of normal journal practice, which is that the JSAS board meets quarterly. The entire board convenes and meets every quarter to discuss every single paper. So every single paper comes before the board and is discussed with the editor and the readers making their recommendation. And what comes out of that is a proposal. Usually there are kind of three major categories that can fall into. One is simply rejected. The second is to ask for a resubmission, which is a major reworking of the paper, usually in not exactly the same way. And the third and most common is revision. But revision is a broad category, so it can be very minor things or it can be quite major things. But nobody is simply published. Everyone revises to some extent. I mean, that's just absolutely standard. So what are the main stumbling blocks for articles that are submitted to JSAS? The most common is that it's simply inappropriate for the journal. So if we get an article in that has a lot of economics, mathematical equations in it, we just reject it because our readership can't understand that. Not a lot of economists read JSAS. So that wouldn't be for us. So we would simply reject it. The other big category is what I'm going to call variations on the theme of narrowness. That may mean a very thin empirical base. So you just basically, there isn't much research in it. It's just kind of pontificating about something without a lot of evidence. The other shape that takes is that there is no engagement with the wider academic literature. So it's purely empirical. So, it may have something new to say about a particular thing, but that doesn't tell us about anything broader that is relevant to academic debates. And both of those are a kind of test of significance. So you want to pass muster in JSAS, you have to go satisfy people who are real experts in the field you're writing about. And they're usually on the board someone who knows quite a lot about the topic. But you also need to write something that's of interest to people who have absolutely no interest in the case study you're writing about. So if I don't care at all about what's going on in the Congo, of course I care deeply in the Congo, but if I didn't care at all about it, I should still be interested in this article. It's got to make a bigger claim, a bigger contribution to an academic debate, academic literature. So often those are the two areas where people fall short. But saying that, it's also often a question of extent, and that's where the requests for revision come in. So this is often a negotiable thing. So people are very aware that you just may need to read some more literature. You may need to be referred to a bunch of articles which you, for some reason, haven't referred to, which address directly the things you're talking about. So that's where revisions come in. Or you may be asked to strengthen the empirical side of your research. So the editors and the readers are trying to help you strengthen the article when they write back to you. And it can be extremely horrible to receive readers' reports that are critical. I tend to sort of go hide somewhere for a couple of weeks after I get readers' reports to recover and then be able to address them with a positive attitude. It's very hard to receive criticism. Everybody suffers in the face of it, but they are intended to be constructive. They are intended to make your work better in the end. So they should be taken in that kind of spirit. Okay, so I'm going to turn over to Gerald to talk about the mentoring program, and then to Miles, and then we'll just open out for questions.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. Well, before I talk about the early career mentoring program, I need to just say a few words about the times we are living in. Basically, this is the age of the vanity press and predatory journal. The kind of people who advertise, even offer to pay you to publish with them. And naturally, it's easy to publish anything, anyway, now. But the benchmark that really gives you the sense of being the academic that you ought to be, or that is respected, is publishing in peer-reviewed and reference journals, of which Journal of Southern African Studies is one such journal with the profile, the history that stretches back to 1977, and that is built up quite a huge contingent of scholars. So naturally, it's important that you take up the decision to publish seriously, so that you don't just publish anyway and for the sake of publishing. The other point about the context we are living in, especially in Africa, is that, and in Zimbabwe in particular, is that academia has become naturally the biggest employer given the economy. Everybody, you can look at the statistics, ends up at some institution, or trying to get affiliated to some institution of higher learning. And one of the requirements, obviously, is the publications. And in this case, often, it's the number of publications that you have. Yet, at the professional level, it's important to have the respect in your discipline. And like Joseph just said, the Journal of Southern African Studies is multidisciplinary. Therefore, it is a pool of experts from different disciplines who are likely to give you very, very informed advice on the nature of your submissions and also, shape your career prospects. For me, I think I joined the advisory board less than a year ago. And what I have seen through the processes that Joss talked about, sometimes, especially from the submissions that come from this end of the continent, is that you find quite a lot of papers trying to reproduce sometimes copies of dissertations or structures of dissertations, so that you find a very good topic starts with, say, theoretical framework or methodology. It's so structured to the extent that it doesn't engage or it doesn't flow in the natural process of telling the story that you want to really sell to the editors. I get the feeling quite often that some submissions actually make it a burden for the editors to know what you intend to share or what you intend to say in your paper. And like Joss was saying, nobody really cares the micro issues, about the micro issues that you'll be dealing with, but it's about how you speak to the rest of the community of the journal and its readership. So it's important, before you even submit, to think about your audience, and more importantly, to comply with the requirements. This is something that she didn't mention, but the citation process itself is important because it tells us how serious you are in your submission. So it's not about conformity, but dealing with the standards that are expected, so that people don't pay attention to those little details about where you put your comma or your brackets or how you punctuate the entire citation system, but that they focus on the content, which gets me to the next point. Research and submissions can be either of the three critical areas. They can be theory-driven, they can be method-driven, or they can be outright empirical. So it's important for you to demonstrate right from the beginning what your submission is all about. so that even if it can be all of these three things that I've mentioned, it's about how you bring these things together to make a meaningful, properly abstracted submission. That's why even sometimes the abstract itself is important. And maybe at some stage we might talk about the formulas of coming up with proper abstracts and how to showcase and sell your ideas and advertise what you are selling without boring anybody or without wasting time. And it's also important to know that with the JSAS system, it's automated. So some of the things will reject you right at the beginning of the technological stage, of the technological phase, where you fail to conform to simple technology issues, because at the time you submit through the online system, which is now, and it has several requirements that I think we should also talk about, so that we don't fail our submissions at the technical level. Then the other thing that I thought I could mention deals with the decisions. Decisions are reached on the basis of the recommendations of the reviewers. And even when the paper gets back to you for revisions, the decisions will then be taken by whether to take you or to reject your article on the basis of the majority of the decision makers and what they recommend. So I think that's what I would just add to the material that just talked about. Then I'll move on to the JSAS Early Careers Mentorship Program. This is a program that was mooted a while back, and it was brought into action this year. And most of you might have seen the adverts, and I'm aware that some of you will be coming to the first workshop in Malawi. But a bit of background to this, which has to do with what I think perhaps this workshop wants to engage with. It has been seen over the years that while the Journal of Southern African Studies is a regional journal, it has been getting lots of very good papers by Africa-based scholars or scholars from Africa who are mostly outside the continent. And although it gets some from within the continent, some of them are very poor quality. And often it has been questioned what it is that actually drives this kind of picture, but quite critically, what can be done to level the playing field in terms of getting as much submissions from Southern Africa as possible. And in the recent past, obviously, speaking of Zimbabwe in particular, a lot of PhDs have come through, and there's a lot of academic action, as I said in my introduction. And it's about getting these young emerging scholars to publish in the journal, but also to help them produce high quality material that can go into the journal. There are several advantages for those that are outside, but also they are limited. There are lots of limits inside Africa or Southern Africa and Zimbabwe in particular, with respect to facilities, for reading, mentorship, and indeed some of the problems that we face with our institutions in Zimbabwe, for instance, with respect to the expansion of the university system, which I must say has emphasized more numbers rather than quality. Access to resources that will help some of us here to get to conferences or to get support in the form of fellowships that would otherwise actually sharpen and hone your skills area of writing and publishing. So the JSAS board is made available funds to assist the process of getting a number of promising young scholars together and pair them with mentors over a period of a year or something to that effect, and make sure that not only do they get the submissions, but that these submissions are properly primed for submission. And this is going to be a process that rolls over continuously. The first workshop, as I said, will be in Malawi, and already the successful applicants have been paired with their mentors, and it will be the job of the mentors to assist the candidates over a space of time to submit proper and high quality material. And this will remain the candidate's work. It is not co-authorship, it's not it's not patronage, but it's about identifying those areas of weaknesses, those areas of strength that could be perfected, so that we don't only achieve a high number of local submissions, but also get high quality submissions at the end. So this is the purpose of the early career mentorship program. It's made up of a core group of JSAS advisors in Southern Africa who constitute the board, the local board. But it will be on a rolling basis. The first workshop is in Malawi, the second one is going to be in Lesotho, Swaziland, Botswana, and then I think the other one will come to Zimbabwe. It is hoped by the time the budget is expended, quite a number of scholars will not only have had access to mentorship, even if they don't make it into the journal, but they also have published. So it's not only about getting to publish in the JSAS. That's the debate that has been there. And naturally, we have invited other journal editors and board members to come and participate, so that if they like some papers, we can also encourage them to submit, or they can do their own work in terms of attracting those submissions to their journals. So participating in this process is not only about JSAS, although there was a huge debate why JSAS should fund for other journals, but we also felt that it's important, if it's about mentorship, it's important to also expose Africa-based scholars to other high-impact journals. And in the Malawian workshop, I think we'll be having review of African political economy, African Studies Review has expressed interest, the Journal of African History will be represented. So it's going to be a platform that allows, that covers up for all those limitations that Africa-based scholars have, so that you can also have a one-on-one with the journals of different, editors of different journals. But more importantly, it's for us in JSAS to actually attract, as much as possible, and maybe in the context of the politics of academia, tip the edge in favor of local submissions, but without compromising quality. I think I'll end with that.
Great. I think the first thing I'll say is it's important when you write an article to try your ideas out with others before you submit it. So get feedback from critical peers. Present your conferences first. Those kinds of processes are really helpful in getting your paper in shape before publication. But also, just to reinforce Joss's point, it's when you do submit, be really careful about the fit. So every journal on the website will be an aims and scopes little tab. Just to read carefully and see if the kind of work you're thinking about submitting actually fits the research interest. Another thing I wanted to add also is about rejections. Those are very demoralizing. I've had my fair share of rejections too. We all get them. But don't give up. Never give up. And the thing about rejection is even if it's rejected, you're getting a hell of a lot of feedback. Go away, use that feedback to get your paper, make your paper better, and send it somewhere else. And that somewhere else may be equally strong journal or the one right second grade. So it's tough to take, but still give it. And the other thing I also want to say is I'm just my experience with love the craft. It's one thing to high impact factor here a lot numbers the programs or the journal to try to be a associate professor. But let's not forget about just loving the craft too. And the sheer joy of going out doing research, you come back and you craft something really new and interesting. So let's not lose that too, love for the craft. And then I'll point out another thing, when you do publish, it's also, because I talked about loving the craft, but make sure you circulate your ideas as well. So with JSAS, once you publish, we give you this link, and I think it's 50 or 100. People can download the article for free. So send it to journalists, people like that who can probably maybe write a story in the newspaper, so that creates a buzz around your work. Rely on Twitter, Facebook, circulate your ideas, get your ideas out. That's how you can influence or shape discussion. Then another thing to touch on what Gerald had to say, this is a mentorship at JSAS. I'm on the mentorship scheme for African Affairs. So we have two, I think I've done 4, and eventually one of them actually got published by African Affairs. So African Affairs is another outlet for that. And the last thing I would say, I just want to briefly refer to some work, a piece by Ryan Briggs and Scott Weathers in African Affairs 2016. They looked at publishing trends from 1993 to 2013. And what they found is that the number of articles written by Africa-based authors has declined in that period. That's exactly what Gerald was saying. But what's interesting is while there's been that decline, the number of articles by women has risen remarkably. And so it's just a shout out to the young women academics aspiring. It's academia is changing. Once was male dominated, but making important strides. But so that should encourage you to feel confident about putting your work out there. So and then the other thing I want to add for the point to this article. While that is the case, also, is that right? Africa-based scholars are also still cited less than the Western ones. That's something that comes up. But again, not women. So not a progress. But also to know that Africa-based authors are more likely to write about a smaller number of countries. They never generalize and to talk about Africa in very expansive terms. That's often a habit of so-called Western scholars. And Africa-based scholars often do not write about economics or conflict. Your Western-based scholars, the ones who focus on economics or conflict. These are all politics. So I think that the significance of all this is it's shaping the nature or the diversity of particular discipline of politics. The state of the knowledge, what we know. So I think, or the reason I'm bringing this up is Africa-based scholars maybe is really scope because we do such different things, really fine, detailed work to contribute to that diversity. So work from Africa is much needed. Okay, I'll say that.
Thank you. Especially the three speakers highlighted the reason why most of the publications are rejected. I think you will for yourself. And inappropriate papers, narrow themes, and perhaps lack of this speaking to the large audience, lack of that in the paper. So it doesn't attract the attention the paper might deserve. Secondly, you also have a talk on how decisions are made in publication of a particular paper, or process of decision making on whether a paper should be published or not. Also, those, I also have a talk on the early mentorship program by Mazaria. He was there himself, and a number of students who have applied for that. We hope they will be successful in the application and be able to attend this mentor program. I think that can be a very right. Never give up. Often give up. And you get nasty comments. I know this is that. First time I think I actually had my comment from JSAS that were written almost 2000 when I first published my story. Sometimes you get discouraged by mention the comments. Put it aside and perhaps try it again, read the comments and see if you can do something about it and respond in something which you don't want. So never give up. A strong message from 10 miles. And then I also spoke of circulating the ideas as widely as possible so that people get more interested in the work and they're participating in particular. And also, I'm interested in the recent findings which I mentioned are quite interesting. But one would wonder exactly how the coverage of that study, how wide was it, and what kind of journals were involved. We tend to have sometimes we assemble list of journals and leave larger pictures. So you don't get a total picture. Okay. Any questions, any comments yes.
Yeah, I can just shout from this. Thank you for that enlightening session. Can I take you back, Professor Mazaret, to what you said about abstracts? I've heard claims that Africa-based scholars, put in very poor abstracts, and sometimes papers are thrown away, at that very first level. Wow. Can you just take us through some of the ideas that you could keep us with? Because really, if your paper is thrown away at abstract level, surely we have a long way to go. We have a long way to go, and those are the basics of publishing.
Okay, thank you, Chair. My issue is with a situation where the FC have mounted the paper and they send it to JSAS. Then JSAS makes a lot of important work by assessing the paper and make it very important and critical suggestions about how to improve it. And then there's sometimes they tell you not to bring it back to them. Doing more that way. Wonder, the moment you move it to another journal, their own expectations. So I don't know whether it is this policy or what is really the position when the work is being done. The positions are there, but then they don't need the paper element.
Okay, thanks, Simon. Well, I don't want to turn this into a methodology workshop, but it's rare though that just the abstract is treated, especially when you submit to a journal. It's usually the full paper. And in some of the submissions that we did see for the early career mentorship program, some people made the mistake of just submitting the abstract, not the full paper, in order to demonstrate how ready is your readiness for submission. But maybe because you asked that question, I should just give you my idea of the format of a good abstract. It's very simple. It's usually background, context, and main point. It allows you to sell the idea right away, whether you are dealing with, as I said earlier on, an empirical issue, a theoretical one, or perhaps even a methodological one. So indeed, I agree with you. The abstract is important and it should sell. But it's also important that you highlight at an early stage through such a formula. There can be many, but this is the basic one, which is not the only one. That allows you to give a sense to the reader what to expect. It's supposed to be like your tag or your advert of how much you are worth. And I think people should be able to say we are buying you at that stage.
I think actually writing abstracts is a bit of an art. And I mean, for the purposes of journals, as Joel's saying, you're submitting the entire paper. So it's not going to be judged just on the abstract. But when we circulate for readers in JSAS, it's the abstract that gets circulated. So it is significant in that regard because it will attract or repel, readers on the basis of what you put in there. But yeah, it's always hard to summarize a longer piece in a paragraph. But I think Joel's exactly right. You want to provide something of the context. But also then really tell us why this matters. Why should we care? What is the significance of this paper? And that's about getting to your findings. It's not like this is the question I'm posing. It's like, what are you actually telling us? So that has to be summarized in that abstract. And I'm really not saying this is easy to do. It's actually very hard to do. But if you want to catch someone's attention, that's your chance to do it, definitely. And it will also, in our case, make sure you get readers who really are interested in what you've actually written about. Definitely don't cut the first paragraph of your paper and put it as the abstract, which a lot of people do at the same time, I think. But yeah, it will just annoy your readers if you do that. So put some hard work into giving the abstract an effective piece of communication. On the recommending you send your paper to another journal, I'm trying to think of a case of that I had with JSAS, and I read a paper not that long ago that was very narrowly focused on debates in agrarian economics. And I think it probably has something interesting to say about those debates, but those are not debates that our readers are interested in. It was technical, a technical set of debates, and it was using concepts which are very specific to a particular field, which we don't really engage. So, my feedback was, this may be very interesting. I actually am not sure because I'm not qualified to read it, and nor are our readers. So you want to be sending this to someone who's going to be fascinated by it and really want to interact with it, and that's not JSAS. So I said it should go to a journal of agrarian economics, of which there are many. So that's again like who is in your footnotes? In this entire article, all the footnotes were other journals of agrarian economics. So that was the audience for them. So I mean that's just one example. So I'm sure there's lots of different variations on this, but it was a clear case of sending it to the wrong journal in that instance.
It's just a point on abstracts. Look, when I write, I'm not very disciplined in terms of sticking to what I should be saying. I also have to say other things as well. And then what should be journal article 8,000 words winds up in 15. So what I often do when I write articles is to just get the abstract right first before actually getting into the meat. Maybe you draft some ideas, but this is what I want to say, and this is the important. And just really something I know is manageable within say 8,000 words, and then that then disciplines what I actually say after. I just stick to that. So abstracts can work in different ways. But for me, that's the discipline tool. So getting them right is quite clear.
At what point do you decide to have a special issue feature? Come across when that makes you make that decision. Any other points?
What I'm going to say, it's not about me because I published JSAS. But I often hear people say, oh, well, the thing with JSAS is that when you take a copy, there are people you can always guess that they put an article in there. And so there's this thinking that there are people that JSAS seem to give preference. These are people that are publishing online over again in there, and then there are some that are then shut out, and I think it connects with what you are saying. So I want to find out, what could be the response to that sort of thinking which is out there. It's not
I'm going to take the question about special issues. The other one. No, I mean, there's a kind of connection between them. Yeah, special issues almost always emerge out of conferences that are supported by this. So almost every single special issue will come out of that process. And those are usually initiated by board members. So I'll go to my colleague Miles Norman and I'll say, you know what, we really should do over a conference in this area because there's a lot of new scholars working in there. I've encountered a bunch of PhD students who are interested in this. And the debate is new and it's exciting. Let's try and be at the forefront of that. Actually, an example is the one that I edited with Miles and Joan McGregor recently on the transnational connections of liberation movements, in which Gerald had a piece as well. And that really came out of a whole lot of new research which started to be done based on, for example, the East German archives. There were new archival sources, there were new oral historical sources that were beginning to cross boundaries that hadn't been crossed before in thinking about the histories of liberation movements. A lot of young scholars were doing that work, so a lot of them were just finishing their PhDs or on postdocs. So we brought together a bigger group of people, and then we selected the papers out of that collection. And I think we produced a really interesting article, a collection of articles in the end that pushed the debates around those questions forward. And that's kind of the purpose of a special issue. It's to really interrogate a particular theme that is raising new questions and breaking new ground. So they're the kind of things that people will take up as an initiative and push forward. It's a huge amount of work to do it, I should say. Organizing a conference and then editing all the papers, something that will take a year out of your life. Fairly intensive, both networking and editing and raising funds to do it and all the rest of it. So you don't take it on lightly, but that's how it works. So sometimes those special issues are about creating community, sometimes they're about reflecting community, and that may look like there's a kind of in-group at work, like maybe getting to the second question a little bit, that we tend to live within communities of scholars and we draw on those because we know about them, and we have to make a big effort to get outside that. And that's partly done through, for example, having a big call for papers for your conference. So you find scholars that you weren't aware of before who are working on that particular issue. So you try to open out the doors as far as you possibly can at that stage. But inevitably you have your patch that you know very, very well, and you tend to return to it to some extent. So I describe the process as JSAS assessing papers, and I think it is that there are papers present. So I would be loath to see that as the place. We try to open up, but I'm aware
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. There's a connection between the special issues and networks and in some cases even mentorship. The fact that board members in JSAS, like in this case, there's an editor of critical studies now. The fact that board members get together and try and also push their own research priorities, or in fact build networks around certain or common research priorities within a particular cohort of editors. Makes it easy for them to extend networks roughly around common interests. And naturally, this brings about special issues. And if you look at it, special issues are not as consistent as normal issues because they are not counted in the volume. Is that am I correct? Special issues. They take up, but the rest of the other submissions are in the 6 issue. They are not counted. So special issues and special people they take up just a fraction of that process because it is a requirement that a special issue comes. And if you look at what other issues when you came up with the special issue, that was there, for instance, on my interest in Sandra Swaps work. And we built a cohort of people who didn't even know, who expressed interest in working on animals. And we ended up coming up with a special issue. I'm now sitting on more than 4 special issues, for instance, where you can tell that Mark or is pushing this agenda because it is the core group, and over and above the advisory input. Sometimes it is the core themes that make up conferences, themes that make up special issues are even identified by board members. So that's what might explain these themes that make up themes that make up special issues. But I must also make mention one thing that I sort of list the Vice Chancellor and the deans. Special issues are perhaps slightly higher quality than editing. In the recent past, we've seen friends gathering under a tree and they're putting papers together and rushing through the press and getting it published and so on. To the extent that with all these promotion issues, issues that actually drive the academic in Southern Africa at the moment, we see a trend where the issue of vanity publishing is going out of hand, and I think it's important for us to really turn to the more rigorous process that the journals provide for the special issues. I might sound bad in that respect, but you can know, for instance, that a special issue will go through the rigorous process that a normal submission goes through. It's not only about the same people gathering together, but themselves also submitting, it's about them submitting themselves to the process that the standards of the journal require. And I think when calls for special issues or calls for conferences come, it's important for people to understand and make applications without necessarily bending backwards to fit the conference call. That's another disadvantage and actually disturbing thing that I've seen, where even in the submissions you see somebody submitting a whole dissertation or and even forgetting to remove that part where it says the submission, you see somebody partial submission, partial fulfillment. Hey, honestly, we see that coming, and you can tell this somebody's just been lazy to submit something properly, and they are printing papers to fit into a conference. If it's a conference on the soil, and it's a presentation with bears, it's something that bears with soil, and it's I don't know, I like to digress, but these are the I don't know, I like to digress, but these are the
special people kind of thing. The one thing for JSAS, so when the reviews reports come in, everything is still laid out to the entire board. The one thing for 30 people from all over. Okay, so any chance of anyone trying to, ensure that certain people are or to obstruct other people from operating, I think it's quite limited because it's a very transparent process. And this is not a criticism of journalists, but it's just to say that it's a real plus of JSAS. Whereas other journals, it's just two editors who decide, are we publishing this or not? Our JSAS is really this. So I think actually JSAS is more transparent. But I hope that was too different.
You said Jesus is not to be called.
Thank you very much. My question probably is also a bit related to what Professor Mazali was saying about the rigorous processes and now what is happening of late where he says some people are just gathering under a tree, gathering some hastily written paper, before you know it, it's a book. Maybe I should maybe also highlight that we are working, academics are working under a lot of pressure, this publish or perish kind of regime where people are under pressure to apply for promotions, or get tenure, and so on. It all depends on publications, as you said. Maybe I've also heard some colleagues complaining that sometimes you submit a paper, obviously sometimes at the back of your mind you've got promotion or something that you want to achieve. Besides, in addition to the usual reasons for publishing, the paper goes on 3 years down the line, the paper is not published or something not yet out. So I wanted to ask maybe with regards to JSAS, if you could just give us a timeline from the point when one makes a submission to the time when we actually have a published article, because people are increasingly under pressure to actually get paper published. The time when we actually have a published article, because people are increasingly under pressure to actually get paper published.
Just out of curiosity, of course, you mentioned that the process of getting a paper published is so rigorous. In some cases, it's so demoralizing. I was wondering, is it possible for one to submit another paper while he or she is in that process of demoralization? So that you have two papers being submitted to the journalists. So that you have two papers.
Just be responsible in terms of success in publication. And I can submit this year, next year, another year, and then 5 publications come in, and they are good. And so I'm appearing every year.
I'm aware of that.
Let me interrupt you on the time span question. JSAS has struggled with that, and we for many years had a very long backlog of articles that were just in a queue waiting to be made. And we decided at some point that the queue wasn't fair enough. And I think we were up to something like 2 years from submission to publication. And that's part of the reason we moved from 4 issues to 3 and 6 issues a year. So we're trying to get things done quicker. And I think we're closer to a year now than 2 years. But it's, it does depend on, because we discuss every paper in the board meeting. So if you submit a paper immediately after we've just had a board meeting, then we're not even going to discuss the paper for another 2 months. So that can increase the delay. And then sometimes readers don't read immediately. The editor has to chase them a few times before the report comes in. That can add another delay. And then of course the revision process, partly because people are demoralized by comments. You know, I literally have to put an article away for a while before I can go back to it, because I'm not emotionally strong enough, emotionally, robust enough to actually face the process of revision. So, in fact, I had a paper that I sat in the drawer for about 5 years. Comments. So, I think, then it depends on, then you control that. How fast you revise. But that's, that's also subject to all the other pressures of being effective, as usual. But I mean, JSAS has worked very hard to try to reduce that time span. I think for most journals, it's a year plus. So if you're planning to get, you want something out in next year, you got to get it in. But JSAS has worked very hard to try to. And then publishing people multiple times in the same journal, JSAS does do that. So we don't have any bar. It's not usual for people to submit 2 articles at the same time, certainly. That would be very unusual. So that I wouldn't recommend it. And anyway, you want to publish in more than one journal. Why would you publish all of them? If you want to do other leaderships. But we have, because we play a particular role, I think, in Southern African scholarship, people do come back to us. But there tends to be a gap. One thing which may narrow that gap is that you're in specialist or something, and then you come back. We have, because we play a particular role. But yeah, it's not, we don't bar people do come back.
This has nothing to do this as much as others, but it's looking at least a year before it comes out. But a lot of other journals do this online first, I think. Yeah, so your paper can be online. Long before it actually comes out in the paper. So they are quite good. Concerted moves to cutting out. Yeah, so your paper can be online. Long before it comes out in the paper. Concerted moves
I briefly just wanted to get back to a comment that Miles made, also sort of switched in relation to something that Josh said. Miles, I think you pointed out very sort of accurately that Africa-based scholars, say writing on politics, do tend to focus more on particular group general, are less likely to make large claims about Africa as a whole. And yet at the same time, trends in major journals gravitate towards speaking about Africa as an entity and trying to shape a kind of, I guess, a sort of epistemological agenda in which it is legitimate to look at Africa as a block. And that of course, jars with then perhaps the model that people within African universities are working with and how they understand and how we understand our kind of social and political world. I guess, and at the same time, of course, to get published, you do need to be making larger claims. So I guess, which is the point that Josh made, that you don't want to be so finely empirical that it's difficult to make clear why this should be relevant to a broader readership. And so I guess the question is both who and how do we understand the norms around what is a suitable broader claim? Because I think that one doesn't really want to play or participate in a game in which we keep perpetuating ideas about Africa as a generality, but at the same time we want our work to have a wider readership. Because I think that one doesn't really want to play.
So I was just wondering about the other side of the readers for journal articles. Now I know the JSAS board has numbers states and has to be released, but do you have any sense of how many scholars within African universities are asked to read papers from other journals, either regional journals? And that's more a question perhaps for the scholars representing here. Because as I know, it's another pressure to read a paper and to review it, but it does teach you a lot about the process as a scholar, I find. So I'm just curious how many opportunities to engage with that side of the process there are on the side. Because I know it's another pressure to read a paper, but it does teach you a lot about the process. I'm just curious how many opportunities
Yeah, I was conscious of the mild offering almost as a critique the idea that African scholars aren't making big comparative claims or writing about Africa as a whole. And I don't think that's mild as a point, but it's maybe an unfair point, and it's maybe a science critique. So political science values that big end, as they call it, kind of comparative methodologies, whereas historians do not. So maybe maybe I'm generalizing again. Social historians don't value big end comparisons. That's not the kind of game we're doing. Certainly not. That does not mean you can't make points about significance. The idea that you need to make a big comparative case or you need to draw huge generalizations about all of Africa, that doesn't make your point significant. Those points are utterly trivial, or absolutely misleading, or problematic in a positive way. So when I say something has to be significant, you have to address a wider debate. That debate may be any kind of debate. It doesn't have to imply pretty generality or some kind of point. You can enter into very intense debates about the nature of the state, the nature of the law. There's engaging with scholars from South Asia or a whole range of other things. It doesn't have to be about saying in Africa, across these 6 countries. So these are methodological and theoretical approaches that lead you in different directions. But certainly from the point of view of JSAS, it's not a big science journal in the same way that there's and it values different countries. So generalizations about Africa would be considered exceedingly problematic by the vast majority of the board on JSAS would meet with a strict set of criticism, and certainly from my point of view. But yeah, so I mean, I absolutely take your point, and generally it's something that needs to be unpacked and think about. And I wonder about, I was listening to thinking about an idea that is a criticism that the African scholars write about more local countries. I suspect there's a kind of comparative advantage involved in that. African scholars can write about local questions with an incredible level of sophistication and richness of evidence because they're based in these countries, and because they have the linguistic skills, and because they have extraordinarily deep knowledge in the context of the question they're asking. So it's offered almost as a critique, whereas they maybe could be turned on its head. But with that, you have to be engaged in other scholars as well. So there has to be that broader engagement. So it's offered almost as
that's something to take a step to these questions. And it goes back to the issue of special. I think in terms of dealing with special issues, we must contend with the idea of the critical mass of ideas that begins usually with the poet, but it's not necessarily confined to the poet. So it is possible that a group of scholars, here or anyway, come up with a proposal for a special issue. And they can become guested into the board, but not necessarily do that in JSAS, that study as well. That we get people who are not even on the board, editing the whole special issue. And the point I'm just pushing that is you are not debarred from actually coming up with an idea to a special issue. People who are not on the board, India are not debarred from coming up with any number of special issues. So if you really want to appear at times, whatever the case might be, you have the latitude. So it's not just about the people inside or the court or the counts, but it's a meeting process which you can actually participate in directly. Because it's all about identifying people mass and so it's not just about gathering around the common theme and making it viable and receivable. People must have to the rigorous process. Because it's all about identifying people mass and gathering around the common theme and making it viable and receivable. People must have to
maybe from JSAS, but also other journals that you're on the board of, speak a little bit about open access publishing and how that's changed.
I think one thing about Zimbabwe and the library systems here is that they are very much part of the open access system. And I'm not really qualified to talk about the management facilities, but I know in-house library systems pays for a lot of journals, which are accessible as long as you are logged into the system when you can get certified by the system. I've been involved in Aluka, and one of our drives was to make JSTOR in particular, and the products that we uploaded there available for free to any to any page number or whatever that is identifiable with Africa, or that is from Africa, that you get that free. And now with the online system, some of the rights are pretty straightforward, including even, like Joss was whispering to me just now, the fact that you can publish ahead and have your article available online and even accessible to at least 100 people way before the print version of the journal is actually available. You can put that on your CV or print it out to your friends and share. But in terms of access, I think one of the things that we are also doing in the workshop in Malawi, we commissioned the research on the various countries in Southern Africa as far as the access to the journals and how that can be improved. And you know, the access regime itself, how it can be improved, and to what extent it disadvantages the access scholar. But as it stands right now, by the time we get to the workshop, there will be reports on the levels of access. And JSAS, I think, has been going out of its way to actually identify institutions in Southern Africa that are not getting access to JSAS and making it available and free, including physical copies. JSAS, I think, has been going out of its way to actually identify institutions in Southern Africa that are not getting access.
This is more. This institution of my guys, where paper has been sent to the regulatory then you feel you want to retrieve your information. You feel the information is important. The paper is good in some way, but it is already all this way. We wish you want to keep it because if it keeps there, then it's not useful. So what is the way where you feel you want to rescue?
You can't
Assuming you would have done some great improvement.
Rescue me, trying to rescue. I'm one of those people caught up in a situation like that, where I think I started publishing when I was doing a master, just after the master, and I didn't know what. I mean, the talk of credible journals was very small. In fact, I remember celebrating, and trying to explain to my nephew what it meant, because during the crisis in 2008, in fact, you come and celebrate he asked me, I'm celebrating a publication, trying to explain to me, do you get money from that? People are thinking about food and bread and butter issues. They're coming with a paper to say you're publishing in a editorial journal for that matter. I didn't understand. So I think I did publication in that direction. And even institutions are not even fast about going to press publication. Then I have good tenure. But if you bring them again, this time around, you won't regret. But how I have dealt with it is to say, look, I still have potential in whom to publish. I mean, that has happened. It's now part of administration. But I don't even worry or crack my head about it. Perhaps the best that will happen is if I decide to come up with a book on because it was basically cannibalizing my master's thesis. That's why I wrote this publication. So I think one of the best that will happen is so if I want to do anything about it, probably a book, but that is based on an improvement. This is not the chapter, so I'm not going to ask you anything. But losing sleep, trying to rescue them is perhaps no longer. Because I believe strongly that there is so much out there to research and write, and potential is so great that you can be chewing your head over. I believe strongly that what they gone through in my past. New research areas, new research projects, new collaborations, new what. The space is just too huge to worry about the experience.
My question is one of which was raised earlier. I mean, one of the ways to get published, start getting very difficult. We are going to decide because we know which books. Which kind of books are out, and it's JSAS interested, which is book reviews. So I don't know what is JSAS because book reviews. How do I know which books are out? Because the JSAS interested in book reviews. I don't know what to
I know after you started reviews, yes, these are out every now and then. So you go to the website, you see what new books you put all the time. So it's one part of my know it's I'm not sure about this.
I suspect JSAS is he approaches people to review them. There's also a possibility to approach him and say, I've seen there's 3 new books out on Zimbabwean politics, may I write a review article? And of course, a review article is far more valuable to you than a single book review because it counts as an article. So that's one possibility. But of course, you'd have to say, this is the kind of thing I want to do. Let's put some thought into it in advance. And book reviewing is very labor intensive too. I don't know anyone who hasn't sat with like a pile of books they've agreed to review on their desk for years, because the time you get to read a whole book, it almost never happens. So actually, book review editors are often very keen on doctoral students as reviewers because they actually write them, as opposed to those of us who are a bit long in the tooth. I've actually stopped reviewing books because of the guilt, it was too much. But yeah, so I think every journal runs through the policy, but all journals will have a book review editor between you making to say, you have some ideas or a particular book you're interested in. And then as Pius says, after size review has this entire, categories of books that it lists, I think, every 3 issues. I wanted to just, there's one other thing I thought just to mention, which is I get requests from scholars in Zimbabwean universities through ResearchGate quite frequently. And I'd be curious to know how often people use ResearchGate. Because it'll often be a request for a particular article, or I've actually put up full text versions of lots of articles on that site. It seems like quite an effective way to engage in scholarly exchanges where people's access to journal articles or indeed often much more complicated book chapters is limited in some way. So that's another route through which to connect with authors and to get access to published work.
There's also academia edu, but I think recently they've been asking you to pay.
Yes.
You want to see who is ready to so,
yeah.
So that's getting pretty cool, yeah. But
yeah.
I know the systems. I think we put all our articles there, upload them. So we have 10 minutes before. Now we keep them like 10 minutes.
I've got a comment. I want to say that I enjoyed my experience when I was publishing JSAS. I received very useful comments, and I think it had what determined the article to be published was the speed with which I incorporated the comments. So I noticed that the feedback, I think it came within reasonable time, 3 months. And then, of course, I took 6 months working on it, and I remember my first experience when I got these comments. I was in Stellenbosch, so I went to this professor and said, this year has been done for you. And they said, oh, in this profession, all you need to do is to develop a very thick skin. And I think for those that will be submitting papers for the first time, you just need to know that there's no one who is special. So he also took me to his office and showed me comments on his paper and said, no, yes, I've also received the same. So I think, as a word of encouragement to our postgraduate students, it happens in academia that sometimes something that you think it's up there, where it is exposed to a wider audience. Some people may have comments on it and they may not think that it is of the right standard. It's never personal. Sometimes it's good to step back a bit and then come back to it and it's no longer emotional. So I think that's what I just wanted to say. So for me, at the end, after going through that process, I could feel that this paper is now much better. And such that when I go back to it, I ask myself, was this really me who? So I think that's all I can say.
Yeah, so sometimes when we sit down to write this article, you are unaware of some of the research piece of literature, and you are surprised when they tell you to read this piece of work in that piece of literature. You have those additional comments. And if you incorporate those comments into the paper, you produce a wonderful paper. That's normally happening. I'll give you over to NBC. It's almost like
Thank you very much. Okay, I think we are about 5 minutes ahead of time, but we are not going to take a break. I think we better move on. And so I'm going to, we're going to move on to the next stage of our program. And in this particular case, we are looking at this I was asking myself all along, and I thought maybe I don't know this answer. So I was trying movie where I could see a few disaffected faces. Alright, it's okay. So we're going to break for lunch. Okay, I have just been informed that food lunch will be ready in the next 10 minutes, so don't be so disaffected. It's just a matter of 10 minutes. In the meantime, our musician has just gone out, but perhaps we could use these 10 minutes to network. If we've got further questions or some personal questions, those that you are afraid to ask, in public, hearing that someone might feel they are stupid, but do an answer. So it is the time to interact with someone and ask questions and so on. But after that, we're going to go for our lunch, and let's debate within the hour. Lunch will be served outside where we got our breakfast. So let's debate within the hour of, from now on. Thank you very much. Good afternoon.